All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our training this evening. We are so happy to have Jennifer Chang, special education attorney, here to talk about 504 plans and how they differ from IEPs, as well as how to address bullying if your child has an existing IEP. First, for anyone who's new here, we just want to briefly talk about the FRC and what we do here in San Mateo County. We serve families who have children with disabilities between the ages 0 to 22. We are staffed by parents and caregivers of children and young adults with disabilities, and we provide support, information, resources, and referrals to navigate the systems. We also offer trainings like this one, support groups, a resource binder, and a monthly e-newsletter. We are funded in part by the Department of Developmental Services, DDS, as well as the California Department of Education under the Special Education Division. I want to give a disclaimer that the FRC is not a legal firm or legal services agency, and we cannot provide any legal advice. Any information provided by us should not be considered a means of taking the place of legal advice that must be obtained through an attorney. With that, we invite you all to connect with us, and we'll put our contact information in the chat. I also want to introduce our team today. My name is Iris Wen, and I'm the training coordinator. And here with me is Patricia Idrugo, FRC supervisor. Next, we just want to go over some general housekeeping items to make sure our training runs smoothly this evening. As mentioned, we will be recording this training to make available on our FRC video library. So we ask that you please mute yourself when not speaking to avoid any background noise, and please be respectful throughout this training. As mentioned, we are offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish today. So if you haven't already, you can select the language you would like to listen to this presentation in the settings bar under the globe icon and choose either English or Spanish. We are also offering live automated captions today. So if you'd like to view the captions, you can go to your Zoom settings bar, find the CC icon and click to show captions. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Please save your questions for the end. We encourage you to take notes and write them down so you don't forget them. And during Q&A, you can use the chat box or raise hand feature for any questions and comments. During Q&A, we encourage you to refrain from sharing any names or detailed information to protect your privacy. And after you ask a question, please be mindful of making some pauses to allow our interpreters enough time to translate both the question and the answer. At the end of the training, we will distribute a survey both in English and Spanish to collect your feedback on how the training went. It will be anonymous and just helps us to understand how to improve our trainings for you all. And last, we will send a follow-up email tomorrow with all the materials and resources discussed during today's training.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jennifer Chang and I am a special education attorney in California. Today I'm going to go ahead and talk about just briefly what a 504 versus a special, what the difference is between a 504 and an IEP and how to address bullying issues. Just keep in mind that this is just the bare minimum information I am giving you. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we only do have an hour and I do want to save time for Q&A. Okay. So I'm not that tech savvy, so just bear with me while I figure this out. Okay. All right, so let's talk about a 504 plan. So 504 is a legal document. It is a contract between the school and the school district and the parents on how they are going to support the student while during academic hours. So generally speaking, 504 plans are appropriate for students who are in general education 100% of the time. If the student requires some outside special education services, it's covered through the IEP, so a 504 plan is really not necessary. 504 plan does not provide any type of services, it's just accommodation. And a 504 plan does not require formal assessments. And I will tell you why it doesn't require any formal assessment. So generally speaking, these are the many eligibility criteria for getting a 504. Student who may have ADD or ADHD, a very short-term disability. So this may be something along the lines of the student injured their leg and they're on crutches. So for the time while they're on crutches, they may need some extra accommodation on school campus. So they'll do a 504 plan. Students with diabetes, just if it is just diabetes, then we do a 504 plan. Same with asthma and any type of allergies the student may have. So the reason why there are no formal assessment process for a 504 is generally the referral comes from a medical doctor. So for example, if the child is in crutches because they fractured a leg or an ankle or something, the orthopedic will write a letter to the school stating how long, what the injury is, how long the student is going to be on crutches or whatever it may be, and what type of support the student may be. So for example, because the student is in crutches, they cannot participate in any kind of physical activity. Because the student is required to, they can't go up and down the stairs, so they may be able to use an elevator instead. So those are the type of, so that's why the referral comes from the medical doctor, and based on those recommendations, a 504 plan is drafted. So there is no formal process on the school's end. So the type of accommodations that's frequent under the 504 plan is like preferential seating, like the student may sit in front of the classroom closer to the door. When they take exams, some students with ADD or ADHD, they have a hard time reading and staying concentrating. So they will have the test read aloud by the proctor in a different room. If the student requires like frequent trips to the nurse or the bathroom, so this is a case where if the child has diabetes or asthma, and the medication, one of the medication side effects is like they have to pee a lot. So they'll be able to be excused from the classroom without having to get the teacher's approval to use the bathroom. Schedule adjustment. So this is, the example I gave of not being able to participate in PE. So during that time, PE will be excused. Late assignments and projects. So this generally applies to like ADHD students. You get like a couple more days or even 5 days to complete the exam or turn in a project. And they get time and a half to take the test. So if an exam, if majority of the gen ed students have 1 hour to take the exam, the student with the 504 will have a time and a half, meaning 1 hour, 90 minutes to complete the exam in a different setting. So that's the gist of a 504. It's just very minimal accommodations just to help the student access to gen ed. The IEP process is much more comprehensive. It too is a legal document. It is a contract from the school district and the parent on how the district is going to support the student. It is what's called a FAPE. It is a free and appropriate education, meaning the parents do not have to pay for any type of services. It is the responsibility of the school district. So I want to point this FAPE out a little bit. I have a lot of families coming to me and asking like, oh, my ABA agency is willing to go to the school setting to support my child, but the district is not allowing it. It will never happen. There is no district that will allow that. Parents are not able to use their medical insurance ABA to support the student on campus. So that is something that's like, you can't ask for it. So if you have questions regarding that, I am telling you right now, there's no district that will allow that to happen. An IEP process has certain procedures and timelines they need to follow. So unlike a 504 doesn't really have timelines, but an IEP does. There are, for example, there are assessment timelines, there's an IEP meeting timeline, and there's an IEP timeline. So what that means is anytime a parent requests for an IEP meeting, the district must schedule one within 30 days. Unlike a 504, you can ask for a 504 meeting, but there is no strict timeline. So sometimes months go by without the 504 coordinator scheduling a 504 meeting for you. Assessment timeline. So when the district is ready to conduct any type of evaluation, they generally send out what's called an assessment plan, and that lists what kind of assessment the district is going to conduct, who is going to be the assessor, and they're seeking parent consent because by law, districts cannot assess a student without parent consent. Once a parent signs the assessment plan, then the district has 60 days to complete the evaluation and hold an IEP meeting. Okay. And so unlike a 504, you can have a 504 in place and not have an annual 504 meeting unless you ask for one. In IEP, there must be an annual IEP. Every year, IEP team has to come together and review the goals and services. And every 3 years, the student will have what's called a triennial IEP, and that's when the team must reassess unless the parent consents that a reassessment is not necessary. So these are the types of assessments that are available under the IEP. This is not a comprehensive list. These are the most popular ones that I see getting done. So you start with the psychoeducational evaluation. So this is like basically looking at the entire student's profile, right? This looks at the cognitive functioning, the processing, the academics, social, emotional, language, adaptive skills. So you're just generally looking at the overall student's functioning abilities. The next one is academics. So this looks at the students' reading, writing, and math skills. Speech and language. So speech and language is a little bit different from an AAC assessment. So AAC assessment is to determine whether the student requires a assistive a communication device to supplement their language portion. And speech and language looks at the student's receptive language, expressive language, and pragmatic language skills. Occupational therapy is another big one. This one looks at the student's fine motor skills, gross motor skills, and the student's sensory needs. Functional behavior assessment looks at the student's behavior. So if the student has challenging maladaptive behaviors or self-injurious behaviors, an FBA will be a good tool to look, because then what they do is they observe, the assessor observes the student, collects data on how often these types of behaviors are happening and why these behaviors are happening. And with that information, the IEP team must come up with what type of behavior intervention is going to be put in place. Another one that I see a lot these days is called a central auditory processing disorder. So this is different from being able to hear. This is not a hearing test. This is the information that the student receives are not going into the appropriate files inside their brain. So for example, I see this a lot in dyslexic students. So they have average cognitive ability, average academic skills, but when it comes to receptive language skills, so any kind of oral comprehension or following or oral directions, the student has a very difficult time that has to do with the processing issue because the information that the student receives are not being stored properly. So they have a difficult time. So, if you tell me, yeah, when I give my son like 3 instructions to do A, B, C, but my student, he only could either do A or B or C, could never follow along a 3-step process, then you should look into the auditory processing disorder. You can tell whether the student may have or suspect the student may have a central auditory processing disorder through a psychoeducational evaluation because one of the cognitive testing that they have to do is auditory processing. It's a very small test that they do, but with that score or the result, generally I'm able to tell whether the child may have auditory processing issue or not. And so you make a referral for this evaluation. I can tell you right now, most districts do not know how to assess in this area. So if you suspect this, and there are only 2 doctors that I know of that does this for school purposes, so not many people do it. So you have to really find the right person to conduct the evaluation, make the recommendation, and be able to provide services. So when we do these assessments, it's not like there are certain protocols or rules that the assessor must follow. The first thing is the assessment must be done by a competent person. So what that means is like a special ed teacher cannot conduct a psychoeducational evaluation because they're not a school psychologist. So someone competent must conduct the evaluation. They must review records, and this record includes any outside therapy notes or progress reports or whatever it may be. So for example, if the student is receiving outside speech and language services, then those information should also be reviewed by the district speech and language pathologist when they're doing the speech and language evaluation. The other component are interviews. So this includes the assessor interviewing parents, interviewing necessary teachers, and if there are, again, outside providers, it's important that they contact the outside provider to gather more information about the students. When it comes to teacher interviews, when the student is in elementary school, this is really not an issue because you only have 1 teacher, maybe at most 2. But at the middle school and high school level, the teacher interview becomes a little tricky. And I say this because sometimes the district will only interview the teachers that either the student is performing well in. So if the student does well in math class, but has a very difficult time in English, and the assessor only interviews the math teacher, then I don't think that interview or teacher concerns are accurate because you also have to look at what's challenging the student in the difficult class to get a comprehensive profile. So those are the things that you want to look out for. Assessment of batteries. So sometimes the district will give parents what's called BASC or CARS or the Vinland. These are rating scale that the parents just kind of check off, like where the student is, how the student is performing. But they must do more than just rating scales. So they must administer certain cognitive standardized tests to measure the student's IQ. They must administer certain, academic tests to define how the student is performing and their academic abilities. The most common one that the district uses is that, the Woodcock-Johnson, things like that. The other component that's also important are observations. So observations, there are three types of observations that happen. One is during testing. So that means it's when the student comes into the assessor's office and they're doing the testing together, that observation should also be noted in the report, because that shows you how the student, like what the student was doing, what the student wasn't understanding, and what the assessor had to do to get the correct information. The second observation happens during class time. So this is another one, just like the parent interview. The observation should happen during a class that the student does well in, but it should also happen during a class time that the student has the most difficult challenge, the difficult time in, so that you can compare or let the IEP team know why in one setting the student is successful, but in the other they're not, and so that we can provide similar, I guess, support in the challenging class so the student can make progress. And the last observation is during unstructured time. So this is during recess and lunch. And part of that is we want to see how the student is doing socially. Like, is the student getting along with peers? Are they having a difficult time? Are they always by themselves? If that's the case, then those are areas that also needs to be supported through an IEP. So based on all of the information, then the IEP team will go ahead and determine eligibility, goals, and services. And that's how an IEP is created. So these are the components of an IEP. It must include a baseline for each goal. So what that means is, if you are drafting a reading goal, you need to include where the student is performing as of today. What grade level are they reading? What's the fluency level? What's their comprehension level? And that, based on that information, you need to draft goals so that the student can get to the next level and keep building upon the reading component. Parent concern is important, because if your concern is, the student's reading fluency is fine, but they're having comprehension issues, that should be noted. And the reason I say that is because sometimes, although parent says they have comprehension issues, like that's their concern, if you look at the goals, that's not being addressed, and that becomes a problem. I mean, that's one of the things that I allege when I file for due process is the concern has always been there, but the district just disregarded parents' concerns. So it's important to voice your concern and have the IEP team look at it. Same with teacher concerns. If IEP meeting after IEP meeting, the teachers are voicing the same concerns, and the student is not making any type of progress, then there's something going on with the services that the district is providing, meaning it's not appropriate and it's not working. So the IEP team needs to come up with different strategies to remediate that. Goals are based on the student's needs. So based on the student, whatever the student needs, has challenges in accessing their curriculum, then they need to draft goals in those areas. So like, I'm going to use reading as an example. Most students with an IEP have reading challenges, but I see this all the time. There's only one reading goal, and this is an issue because reading is more than just one. Like, they'll just do a goal of like in an area of comprehension, but it takes a lot into comprehension, right? How is the child even reading appropriately, accurately? Is the child reading fluently? And then how do we get the child to comprehend, right? So there are different moving parts to it, but there's only one reading goal. So then I think that's not really addressing all areas of need. It's just one part of the need. These accommodations in an IEP are very similar to the ones in the 504, sitting where the, more time on tests, preferential seating, things like that. Services are, this is the offer of faith, where it would discuss, what type of services the student is going to receive. and how those services are going to be provided. So if the student is going to receive 60 minutes of speech and language services, then the IEPT must state how that 60 minute is going to be divided. Is it going to be is one 60-minute or two 30 minutes? If it's going to be in a group setting or an individual setting, if it's going to be in a group setting, how many students are going to be in it? And then if it's going to be is it going to be a pull-out service, meaning is the speech and language pathologist going to pull out 3 groups of students and work on, whatever pragmatic language goals in a different setting? Or is the speech pathologist going to push in, that they're going to go into the classroom for 30 minutes a week and work on the language goals? And if it's individual, also, is it going to be push in or pull out? So there's a lot of things that go into the service. How the service is going to be provided is very, very important, because the way sometimes the district writes these is the student will receive 60 minutes a week of speech and language, pull out or push in as needed. So that means the speech therapist could provide that service as how she sees fit, and it may not even be consistent. So if they feel like doing 10-minute sessions, they can do 10-minute sessions because of the way how it is written. So you must have them write exactly how it's going to be provided. And placement, whether the student's going to be in gen ed and get pull out, SAI, or if the student's going to be in SDC full time, if they're going to be some gen ed placement, some push in gen ed, then also it's, I see it a lot where a student gets gen ed and it's only for lunch, recess, library. I mean, that's really not gen ed, because you're just with gen ed students and you're not really learning with the general. There's no involvement with gen ed students. So if the student, if you can push into even specific time periods, like music, art, history, whatever it may be, that also has to be very specific. So this is the last component, bullying, and this is by far the most difficult one to challenge. I get calls from parents all the time that my kid is being bullied by a student, but the way how the law defines bullying is not what we think bullying is. It says, so this is the ed code of how they're defining bullying. So whatever the other student is doing to my child has to be extremely severe or pervasive. So it's not like, oh, they had a little bit of a fight and you can call it bullying. This is consistent, ongoing. Every time the student, this bullying person, this bully sees the student, they're ready to attack. It has to be going on for some time. And the incident or the behavior is interfering with my students' academic performance. Meaning, even because the bullying is so bad, my child cannot go to school and learn because they're so scared, they're so depressed, they can't do anything. It has to be due to that level to be considered a bullying. So if you tell me, oh, some girls got into a fight and they've been sending text messages to each other and some chats on Facebook, and so my daughter is depressed and not I cannot allege a bullying allegation based on that. I mean, the ones that I deal with are it's in the extreme side, they attempted suicide, or they're ready to go into a 72-hour cycle. It's a very severe cases. So what I tell parents is, although it's what the child may experience may not be to the level of bullying that's defined by law, but it could potentially get there, right, at some point if they keep doing it. So I would say you need to start documenting everything. So what that means is, when you first know of the incident that's happening, it's important for you to, as a parent, either email the teacher or email the principal and say, look, this has been going on. This is what my daughter or my son is sharing. is it possible to hold a meeting to have a discussion on how to prevent this? So then you have a meeting with the teacher and they're like, okay, well, we'll do some sort of a safety plan and hopefully this will make it work. Then despite having that, it happens again and, your child comes home and tells you, they're still bothering me, blah, blah, blah. Then you take it to the next level, right? Then you can go ahead and email the teacher again, counselor, the principal and say, we need to have another meeting because this is still going on. And then you have a meeting and then, nothing changes. And at that point, if your child is deteriorating, meaning like grades are dropping, not eating, doesn't even want to go to school, then I think you may have a case for bullying. But even then, it's very, very difficult to hold the district accountable, meaning we cannot sue the school district to get any kind of monetary damages because there are no true damages under the law. So what I mean is if the student was beat up by like a group of girls and like she got a after the teacher meeting, after the meeting with the principal, and the student was jumped by like a group, the same girls, and got hurt, physically hurt, then we may have a case to go against the school district. But if that is not the case and you want to sue for, your emotional pain and suffering, that's not going to happen. It's very difficult to hold districts liable for that. And I honestly don't know any attorney that will take on the case to sue the school district. So that is my presentation. We have 20 minutes and I'd like to do Q&A instead.
All right, thank you everyone so much for your questions and your engagement this evening. That formally concludes our training. We really appreciate you spending part of your evening with us. Big thank you to Jennifer, as well as our interpreters, Ingrid and Tony. Just as a reminder, we will send out a follow-up email tomorrow with the presentation and materials from this training. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.